But here, we'll be talking about the latest on a differing perspective about what to do about Iran. Over the weekend here, we heard time and time again that the clock is ticking. That's according to many leaders, both here in the United States and in Israel, as well as much of the mainstream media here, that something must be done soon about Iran's alleged nuclear program. Iran was the central topic at this year's American-Israel Public Affairs Committee conference. AIPAC hosted many high-profile speakers, including President Obama. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will speak at AIPAC tonight. But earlier today, the two leaders met to continue the discussion. A few would argue against the notion that President Obama is kind of walking a fine line here, both trying to make it clear that a war with Iran is nobody's first choice, but that Iran is a dangerous place and needs to be kept at bay. Here's a little bit about what he said during that meeting today.
We do not want to see a nuclear arms race in one of the most volatile regions in the world. We do not want the possibility of a nuclear weapon falling into the hands of terrorists, and we do not want a regime that has been a state sponsor of terrorism being able to feel that it can act even more aggressively or with impunity as a consequence of its nuclear power.
Well, President Obama has been criticized by many conservative leaders here in the U.S. as well as in Israel for not being tough enough on Iran. But today he seemed to be trying to make it clear that no matter what happens, the two countries are in this together. Here's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Americans know that Israel and the United States share common values, that we defend common interests, that we face common enemies. Iran's leaders know that too. You know, for them, you're the great Satan, we're the little Satan. For them, we are you and you are us.
So we want to talk more about the rhetoric and the reality today. And to help me do that, I'm joined by Max Blumenthal, a writing fellow with the Nation Institute. Max, let's kind of break this down. There have been many instances since President Obama came into office that people would say, you know, Israel says jump and the U.S. says how high. That's the perspective of some. Other people say, you know, President Obama is, you know, not trying to do everything that he's being told by Israel. What's going on here? I mean, do you think that Israel does, in fact, drive the U.S. foreign policy?
With respect to Iran, it's driving it right now, but it's not driving it to as far as it wants to. It's not able to move the red lines to where it wants to go. We heard Benjamin Netanyahu tell Barack Obama, you're you and you're us. I mean, it's a bizarre statement, but it means we're basically, our interests are the same. That is not true with respect to Iran. Iran poses no threat to the United States militarily, and the Obama administration is acting on assessments from the CIA, from the military intelligence apparatus, that tell him that a war with Iran would be disastrous. Israel is seeking to use the U.S. as its proxy to attack Iran through AIPAC. And what AIPAC is doing in Congress right now is it's given Congress an ask, meaning they're asking Congress to authorize a resolution declaring that the red lines should move, meaning that the U.S. will go to war if Iran crosses these red lines, and the red lines will be that Iran has nuclear capacity and not a nuclear weapon. And Obama has said Iran has to get a nuclear weapon before we decide to act militarily. So they're not, the U.S. is not them, and they are not us.
There seems to be, that is an important distinction to make between the two countries and their interests, and what they've said sort of that line is. We do hear a lot, of course, from you know, leaders in Israel. We hear a lot from AIPAC and some of the voices that they sort of put out into the public to make their case. We don't often hear from Iran, so I think it's important to put this up. I know a little more than a week ago, Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, gave a foreign policy speech, and as part of that speech, he addressed the issue of nuclear weapons. And here's what he said. He said, the Iranian nation has never pursued and will never pursue nuclear weapons. There is no doubt that the decision makers in these countries opposing us know well that Iran is not after nuclear weapons because the Islamic Republic logically, religiously, and theoretically considers the possession of nuclear weapons a grave sin and believes the proliferation of such weapons is senseless. What do you think? I mean, is Khamenei lying?
I think the Iranian regime, I would agree with anyone who says that it's a terrible authoritarian regime and that they're not fully cooperating with the International Atomic Energy Association, which Israel refuses to allow inspections from. Israel also refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But According to U.S. Joint Chiefs Chairman Martin Dempsey, Iran has practical concerns. It is going to act in its own best interest. Its own best interest is not to launch a nuclear strike on Israel. Even Tamir Pardo, the head of the Israeli Mossad intelligence service, says that. And Meir Dagan, the former head of the Mossad, has said that. So it's really Benjamin Netanyahu and Ehud Barak acting through AIPAC, which is like their shadow government in Washington, to alter American policy and move it against American interests. And they've already done that with sanctions. The Obama administration has fought sanctioning Iran's central bank because they knew that it would raise gas prices and oil prices inside the U.S. Congress passed it 100-0, this AIPAC resolution, and now we have high gas prices, and Americans don't really understand why. And now they're pushing a U.S. war for Israel through AIPAC.
So you're saying that Iran is not, you know, a sincerely, genuinely nice, kind country, but you believe that they're not pursuing nuclear weapons?
They may be pursuing nuclear capacity. All I know is they're not complying with the IAEA, and that they, even according to senior members of the military intelligence establishment in Israel and the United States, are not inclined to attack Israel or the U.S. This is about regional power. It's about consolidating the role as a regional power. And I think an older Israeli government that was more clever might have allowed them to get nuclear capacity so they could portray themselves as this little victim in the Middle East. But Netanyahu, it seems so messianic and so influenced by a neoconservative line of thinking that he's taking Israel down this path of self-destruction, hyping war rhetoric and pushing the United States, attempting to corral the United States into a war that could be catastrophic, according to the world-renowned economist Nouriel Roubini, a war that could cause a global recession.
Absolutely.
This is not good for Israeli interests either.
And I think that there are a lot of big players in the U.S. itself that are concerned about exactly what you just said, that the neocons are sort of pushing this agenda. I want to pull up something, just in case you missed it. It was a full-page ad today in the Washington Post. We'll put it up on the screen, basically a picture here of President Obama and Netanyahu. Various quotes here by top officials, current and former secretaries of defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all essentially saying the consequences of attacking Iran are too grave. Now is not the time. Asking the president to resist the pressure for a war with Iran. I'm wondering, what kind of impact do you think visuals like this, these full-page ads in the newspaper, I mean, do you think that people will start to realize, hey, there's another perspective here than what we're hearing from, you know, Senators John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Joe Lieberman?
Well, it's important to make the case against war in public, and Barack Obama has not made the case for diplomacy enough. When George W. Bush was making the case for the war with Iraq, he made 16 major speeches before the war began. Barack Obama has mentioned diplomacy for the first time at AIPAC. So that's significant. But what we're seeing is a constant drumbeat for war. It's influencing American opinion. A Pew poll that just came out of Public Opinion shows that most Americans say they don't know very much about the dispute over Iranian nuclear weapons, and they're not getting information from the mainstream media. And at the same time, most Americans say they favor a military strike on Iran. That's incredibly dangerous. AIPAC is capitalizing on American ignorance and the media's dereliction of its duty to inform the public about what this means and who are the players influencing this drive to war.